I'm just completely surprised. I was not expecting that. There were so many massive records that are so popular, and to be included in that in the nomination was a surprise enough.
Bonnie Raitt is a music legend, but her path to fame wasn't all passion and love. Behind the scenes, she carried deep frustrations that shaped her journey. Even surrounded by music as a child, one part of it made her feel completely disconnected. She struggled with it for years, even as her career soared. What was it that she hated so much? And why did it stay with her through everything? Let's find out. Bonnie Raitt was born on November 8, 1949, in Burbank, California, into a family full of music. Her father, John Raitt, was a famous Broadway star with a big, powerful voice. He starred in shows like Oklahoma and The Pajama Game. Her mother, Marge Goddard, was a talented pianist who filled their home with beautiful music. But Bonnie didn't feel drawn to the piano. Her mother was so skilled that Bonnie found it intimidating and stayed away from it. Even with all the music around her, Bonnie's journey into music wasn't straightforward. As a child, Bonnie was a bit different. While most kids were fans of pop music, Bonnie was fascinated by the beatniks, the counterculture movement of the time. She admired their rebellious attitude and even grew her hair long to look like them. Then, one Christmas in 1957, when she was 8 years old, Bonnie received a gift that changed her life: a Stella guitar. This guitar wasn't just a toy. It was the same kind used by famous blues musicians like Robert Johnson and Lead Belly. It felt like the blues had found its way into Bonnie's hands, even though she didn't know it yet. Bonnie spent her summers at Camp Regis in the Adirondack Mountains from 1957 to 1964. At camp, Bonnie began to shine. The counselors noticed her talent and often asked her to perform for other campers. These small performances gave her the freedom to experiment and build confidence in her music. Away from the pressures of daily life, Bonnie taught herself songs and fell in love with playing the guitar. As she grew older, Bonnie's passion for music became even stronger. She didn't follow pop trends like many kids her age. Instead, she was drawn to the folk revival of the 1950s and spent hours practicing songs from folk albums. In 1964, when Bonnie was 15, she listened to an album called Blues at Newport, 1963. This album featured some of the best blues musicians of the time and lit a fire inside her. It was a turning point. From that moment on, Bonnie became deeply interested in blues music and started exploring slide guitar, a skill that would later define her career. Bonnie Raitt made a huge decision in 1969 that surprised everyone around her. She dropped out of Radcliffe College to follow her dream of playing blues music. Her family and friends were shocked. Radcliffe was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but Bonnie felt pulled in a different direction. She couldn't ignore the music calling to her. Then, in 1969, something life-changing happened. Bonnie met Dick Waterman, a manager who had helped bring back some of the biggest names in blues, like Son House and Mississippi Fred McDowell. She met him at a house in Cambridge, where he had brought some blues musicians to perform. Waterman saw Bonnie's potential right away. He admired her talent and how much she respected the blues. He became her manager, guiding her through the tough music industry and connecting her with legendary artists. Through Waterman, Bonnie got the chance to perform with two of the greatest blues legends of all time, Son House and John Lee Hooker. Son House was a pioneer of Delta blues, and John Lee Hooker's deep voice and unique guitar style had shaped rock and roll. Bonnie, still in her teens, couldn't believe she was sharing the stage with them. In 1970, Bonnie Raitt was just starting out, but her talent was already turning heads. One night, a reporter from Newsweek saw her perform and started talking about how good she was. Soon, scouts from big record companies were coming to her shows. Warner Brothers offered her a deal, and in 1971, her first album, Bonnie Raitt, came out. The critics loved it. They praised her skill with the bottleneck guitar, something not many women in music were known for at the time. Even though her first album was admired, it didn't make her famous. Her second album, Give It Up, came out in 1972 and got great reviews too. One writer called it an excellent set and said she was a creative and emotional performer. But once again, people weren't rushing to buy her music. Her third album, Taken My Time, came out in 1973. Critics loved it just as much, but it didn't sell any better than the others. Her big break came in 1977 with the album Sweet Forgiveness. This album gave her her first hit song, a new version of Runaway. Bonnie's version was inspired by the rhythm and blues style of Al Green. Critics didn't like it much, but the song became a big success. Suddenly, both Warner Brothers and Columbia Records were fighting to sign her. Bonnie later said that Warner Brothers didn't want her to have a hit record with Columbia, so they matched Columbia's offer and gave her a big new contract. What really made Bonnie stand out in those years was her guitar playing. Back then, very few women were known for being great guitarists, but Bonnie was different. She was incredible at playing slide guitar and was inspired by Lowell George from Little Feat. Her skills earned her a lot of respect, not just as a musician, but as a guitarist who could hold her own in a male-dominated field. By 1975, her talent was so well known that she made it onto the cover of Rolling Stone. This was a huge moment, not just for her, but for women in music, showing that they could be just as skilled as anyone else. But soon, everything came crashing down. Bonnie Raitt's battle with alcohol nearly ruined her life and career. It started in the 1970s when she fell in love with the blues scene. She admired old blues musicians like Muddy Waters and Fred McDowell and wanted to live like them. Drinking felt like part of that lifestyle, something romantic and connected to the music she loved. But as the years went on, her drinking got worse. By the 1980s, she wasn't just drinking bourbon or wine, she had moved on to tequila. Nights in Los Angeles became a blur of heavy drinking and wild parties with other musicians. Bonnie later admitted that in those days, sleep was rare and drinking was constant. Everything changed in 1987. Bonnie realized she couldn't go on like this. She joined Alcoholics Anonymous and decided to get sober. What pushed her over the edge was an unusual reason. She wanted to work with Prince. She thought that if they made a music video together, she needed to look good. And at that time, she didn't feel proud of herself. Quitting alcohol wasn't easy, but it changed her life. She also lost 20 pounds, started feeling healthier, and found new confidence. Bonnie's weight struggles were tied to her drinking. As she drank more, she gained weight and felt worse about how she looked. By the mid-1980s, she didn't even feel healthy in her own eyes. This added to her stress, especially in an industry that cared so much about image. The idea of appearing in a video with someone like Prince gave her the push she needed. She took up cycling, started exercising, and worked on feeling better inside and out. It wasn't just about losing weight. It was about getting her life back on track. Her personal life was no easier. In 1983, a painful breakup left her heartbroken and made her struggles even harder. She tried to find love again, but faced more failed relationships. These experiences often showed up in her music, with some of her most emotional songs coming from those hard times. Bonnie did eventually find love when she married actor Michael O'Keefe in 1991. For a while, things seemed good, but their busy careers kept them apart. After 8 years, their marriage ended in 1999. Bonnie also had a tough time with money during the 1980s. Even though people respected her music, her albums didn't sell well. She had to tour all the time just to stay afloat. Things got so bad that Warner Brothers dropped her in 1983. This was a huge blow. She had just finished recording an album, Tongue and Groove, but it was shelved and never released. Bonnie felt lost, unsure how to keep going. In 1986, Warner Brothers decided to release the album after all, though they renamed it 9 Lives. Bonnie re-recorded parts of it, but it didn't do well and barely made it onto the charts. She thought about giving up on music altogether. She felt stuck, without a label, and with no clear path forward. But then Joe Smith stepped in. He was a record executive who had signed Bonnie to Warner Brothers back in 1971 and still believed in her talent. Now working at Capitol Records, Smith gave her one last chance. On December 1st, 1988, he offered her a small $150,000 recording deal. It wasn't much, and Capitol didn't expect her album to sell very well. But Smith gave her something precious: complete control over her music. Bonnie later said Smith supported her no matter what. He would have even approved if she had recorded songs on a truck with a blues legend like Mississippi Fred McDowell. With this new opportunity, Bonnie poured her heart into her next album, Nick of Time, which came out in March 1989. It was her first album for Capitol Records and a very personal one. She worked with producer Don Was, whom she had met while recording a song for a Disney album. The title track, Nick of Time, was inspired by real life. It was about aging and life's big decisions, like whether to have kids. Bonnie wrote it after talking with a friend who wanted a child but was unsure if it would happen. That story had a happy ending. Her friend did have a baby, and years later, Bonnie attended his bar mitzvah. At first, the album didn't make much of a splash. It reached number 22 on the Billboard charts, but didn't stay there long. Still, the album was special for Bonnie. It was her first time making music while sober, after overcoming years of alcohol and substance abuse. She had gotten sober in 1987, and the clarity it gave her made a huge difference. She called Nick of Time her first sober album, and said it came from a place of honesty. The recording process was smooth too. Bonnie worked with skilled musicians and recorded many of the tracks live in the studio, showing her confidence and focus. Everything changed in February 1990 at the Grammy Awards. To everyone's surprise, Bonnie won 3 Grammys, including the big one, Album of the Year. She beat huge names like Don Henley, Tom Petty, and the Traveling Wilburys. The audience was shocked, but Bonnie's humble and funny acceptance speech won them over. She thanked God for helping her get sober and joked that she'd feel great the next morning, thanks to her new lifestyle. After the Grammys, Nick of Time became a massive success. The album, which had been fading from the charts, suddenly shot to number 1 in April 1990, more than a year after it was released. It went on to sell 5 million copies in the US alone. What made this success so special was that it wasn't immediate. It grew slowly, through word of mouth and love for the music. Bonnie had gone from being almost forgotten to becoming one of the biggest stars in music. Bonnie Raitt's career hit another biggest moment with her 1991 album, Luck of the Draw. This album came out on June 25, 1991, and became her most successful ever. In the US alone, it sold over 7 million copies by 2010. Around the world, it added another 2 million in sales, especially in France and Italy. The success of the album meant a massive tour. From 1991 to 1993, Bonnie performed 180 shows, proving her dedication to her music and her fans. The album also had a personal side. Bonnie dedicated it to Stevie Ray Vaughan, a blues guitarist who had helped her overcome struggles with alcohol. Stevie had tragically died in a helicopter crash in 1990. And Bonnie's tribute, Still Burning Bright, reflected how much he meant to her. One song on the album stood out from the rest, I Can't Make You Love Me. Released as a single in October 1991, it wasn't just a hit. It became a timeless classic. The story behind the song is as unique as the song itself. Two writers, Mike Reid and Alan Shamblin, were inspired by a man in court who admitted after a breakup, "You can't make a woman love you if she doesn't." Bonnie's recording of the song was raw and emotional, so much so that after the first take, she had to take a moment to recover. The song, with Bruce Hornsby's haunting piano, touched hearts everywhere. Over time, it's been covered by countless artists and ranked on several greatest songs lists. Bonnie herself still finds it hard to perform, saying it always feels fresh and emotional, connecting with anyone who's faced heartbreak. In 2000, Bonnie was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a moment that celebrated everything she had achieved. During the ceremony, she performed some of her most famous songs, including I Can't Make You Love Me. Her speech was humble and full of gratitude, as she thanked the blues musicians who had inspired her and shaped her career. Even in her 70s, Bonnie keeps shining. In 2022, she was honored with the Icon Award at Billboard's Women in Music event. She used her acceptance speech to speak about the crisis in Ukraine, showing she's not just about music, but also about making the world better. Around the same time, she released her 18th album, Just Like That, and its title track brought her another Grammy win. It proved that, even after 5 decades, Bonnie Raitt is still as powerful and relevant as ever. Bonnie Raitt's life was shaken when she lost both of her parents just months apart. Her mother, Marjorie Haydock, passed away on April 29, 2004, at 86. Less than a year later, on February 20, 2005, her father, John Raitt, died at 88 from pneumonia. Losing them so close together was heartbreaking. It forced Bonnie to face not only her grief, but also the idea of carrying on the legacy her father left behind. But the pain didn't stop there. Bonnie's older brother, Steve, had been fighting brain cancer since 2001. Doctors told him he only had 6 months to live, but Steve wasn't ready to give up. He changed his diet, tried alternative treatments, and managed to beat the odds. For years, he lived life to the fullest, becoming so healthy and strong that friends said he looked like a bodybuilder. Unfortunately, in 2008, the cancer came back. This time, it hit harder. Steve lost movement on one side of his body and eventually lost his sight. Despite his incredible fight, he passed away on April 4, 2009, after an 8-year battle. It was another devastating blow for Bonnie and her family. By 2010, Bonnie knew she needed a break. She had been carrying so much grief that it was starting to affect her deeply. At 60 years old, she decided to step away from music for the first time in almost 40 years. She called it a time to stop and heal. During this break, Bonnie focused on herself. She went to therapy, spent time in nature, and looked back at her family's history. Sorting through old photos and keepsakes brought tears, but also helped her heal. One day, she found a recording of her dad singing, "Hey There." Listening to it made her realize how much she missed singing with him, but it also gave her a sense of purpose. She decided to keep his memory alive by performing their duets in her own shows. Bonnie Raitt has always been more than just a musician. In 1988, she helped start the Rhythm and Blues Foundation. an organization that changed the lives of many forgotten R&B legends. The idea came from a shocking discovery. Many artists who built the foundation of modern music were broke and struggling. One heartbreaking example was Ruth Brown, known as Miss Rhythm. Her early hits made Atlantic Records successful, earning it the nickname "The House That Ruth Built." But despite her huge role, Ruth ended up working as a domestic servant and even had to apply for welfare to feed her kids. This inspired Bonnie to take action. The foundation got its first big boost with a $1.5 million donation from Ahmet Ertegun, the founder of Atlantic Records. Ruth Brown and her lawyer, Howell Beagle, convinced him to help. Since then, the foundation has given over $3 million in grants to R&B artists in need. A memorable contribution came from Motown's Berry Gordy, who donated $750,000 to set up a special fund for Motown artists from the 1960s and 1970s. Thanks to these efforts, many artists finally received the help they deserved. Bonnie's fight for justice didn't stop there. She has also been a leader in protecting the environment. In 2002, she started the Green Highway Eco Village as part of her concert tours. This project taught fans about clean energy options like wind and solar power, and even showcased hybrid cars. Bonnie also made her tour buses run on biofuel long before it was a common practice. Rolling Stone magazine called her the godmother of green touring because of how much she's done to make concerts more eco-friendly. Even earlier, in 1979, Bonnie co-founded Musicians United for Safe Energy, MUSE, after the nuclear accident at 3 Mile Island. She and other artists, like Jackson Browne and Graham Nash, organized the famous No Nukes concerts at Madison Square Garden. These concerts featured stars like Bruce Springsteen and James Taylor, and brought attention to the dangers of nuclear energy. The movement didn't stop there. Decades later, in 2011, Bonnie and Muse held another benefit concert to raise money for Japan's tsunami and nuclear disaster relief. This event was completely off the grid, showing her ongoing commitment to clean energy. Bonnie has also been a strong voice for artists' rights. She has fought to make sure musicians get paid fairly, especially in the digital age. Streaming services have made it harder for artists to earn money, but Bonnie has spoken out about this issue many times. In 2019, she praised Taylor Swift for standing up to big music companies and called on more artists to work together to demand fair pay. She has also supported changes to copyright laws to help musicians keep ownership of their work.